Hi everyone, my name is Sifei. I'm working at NVIDIA as a senior research scientist, focusing on deep learning and computer vision problems. Today, I will present self-supervised 3D reconstruction in the wild. Nowadays, computer graphics can give us millions of ways to generate high-quality 3D models of objects, scenes, and the entire virtual world. For example, here I show the great work from NVIDIA, where now with these tools, we can create pretty high resolution, high quality, and realistic 3D world. And we can also build upon it the simulators that help researchers and engineers to model the areas they are studying in a more creative manner. However, the reverse task that we care about, which is reconstructing images, videos that we captured back to a 3D world, is much harder and painful. Taking this CMU panoptic 3D dataset as example, if we want to capture rich 3D information, first we need to construct a very delicate, controllable environment, and then we need to ask volunteers to go inside this environment pretending to do something while we capture the 3D spatial temporal information. And even though the captured data will contain holes and lots of noises, which means additional efforts need to be taken to post-processing the captured raw data. And yet, this is not the worst case. In more general scenery, like for wild animals, it's impossible to catch them alive and put them in such a controllable environment. Even though large-scale images or video datasets for animals are not accessible due to the difficulty of capturing things in the wild, which makes the 3D reconstruction task even harder. Okay, so far after these introductions, what I want to talk about for today is how to reconstruct the objects that are difficult to be captured, like animals, via as least supervision as possible. Specifically, I will introduce two of our recent work. The first one is how to reconstruct a 3D object only from a collection of unannotated images from the same category. This is a very difficult problem since we assume there's no 3D annotations of any kind, like shape, texture map, and even cameras. In the second part, we will move to a more challenging task. We want to restore dynamic shapes over time with very limited video captured in the wild. For example, with only one video at the test time, we are able to recover the shape via online adaptation. In the last part of this talk, I will present our new work, which is less correlated to 3D reconstruction, but more relevant to the focus of our workshop, which is how to restore high-resolution images. Here, we propose a novel method using implicit representation of the 2D images. We specifically present super-resolution of scenes as a continuous function, where the function learns from discrete pixels but produces continuous, or say, the actual ratio of upsamplings. Ideally, it is independent of any resolution. Okay, so I will introduce the details in the following talk. So from now, I will present the first part, self-supervised single-view 3D reconstruction from a collection of images. This is a work published at ECCV 2020. Our goal is to reconstruct the individual object into 3D meshes without any 3D shape, annotation, camera, keypoint, and template. From the aspect of application, we only need a group of images from the same category, train the model, and then we can do 3D print for all of them, which is quite attractive. Meanwhile, the method also learns a template of one category from scratch as a byproduct. So before introducing the details of our model, I'd like to discuss the key for reconstruction. Given an input image, we need to predict the shape and the texture map. Here we use mesh representation for the shape, where our predictions are a group of coordinates of the vertices. The texture map is a colored map on the UV coordinate. The UV space had a predefined mapping from this map to the mesh and is independent of the mesh deformation. So we can simply combine these two to formulate the textured shape, which is also our final reconstruction. However, this pipeline lacks the ground truth for training. So to make this framework trainable, we can instead resort to the 2D supervision. For example, we predict the viewpoint of the input image, translate the texture shape to this specific view, and use a differentiable renderer to project the 3D back to the 2D space. And then we can simply compare it with the original input through very simple 2D objectives such as negative IOU and the MSE loss. So this high-level idea has been first realized in the ECCV paper named CMR. But different from what I presented, in this work, there's two additional human annotations still required. The first one is a mesh template which is supposed to be closer to the mean shape of the category. When it predicts the shape, the network basically predicts a residual term on top of the template. The second one is the annotated key point, which is used to estimate the camera and also serves as a supervision. The method is not made fully unsupervised. Hence, we try to slightly modify the CMR approach by jointly estimate the individual shape, texture, and viewpoint, along with a differentiable renderer. And then, we found the reconstruction result degraded a lot in visual quality, as shown in the bottom row figures in both C and D columns. So how can we reconstruct the better texture shape while there is no key point and template annotation? In this work, we address it using the cross-instance correspondence. The high-level idea is first to obtain such kind of semantic map. For instance, all the red part denotes the head, while the green part looks like the neck. We note that since the UV space is always invariant to the shape deformation, the head and neck have a fixed location in the UV coordinate map. In a correctly learned reconstruction network, the part of each reconstruction should be consistent whatever the shape of a bird may change, as shown on the left. We call it semantic consistency, and we can directly enforce it during training in order to implicitly train the shape and the texture predictions. So here we briefly introduce the self-supervised core part segmentation work being used in this work. So the name is Scopes, which build upon a pre-trained and fixed backbone network. It initializes K semantic part basis, and the basis is trained through backpropagation so that each base will represent one unique cluster. The weighted sum of all the bases, when being remapped back to the image according to the clusters, can reconstruct the extracted features as much as possible. To enforce such cluster look-like segmentations, as shown in the figure, it additionally applied the geometric concentration and the equivalence regularization. We note that with self-supervised learning, each part does not need to have a semantic meaning consistent to human definition since pixels are clustered in a data-driven manner. Okay, let's go back to our reconstruction network, where I will introduce how to apply the semantic consistency in the following part. First, we have such a base network where we adopt an CNN encoder that jointly predicts the texture, shape, and the viewpoint. And instead of predicting the texture map, we predict a flow map that indicates the current RGB pixel is mapped from which pixel in the original 2D input image. We also represent the shape as a combination of a template as well as its offset. But instead of using human-defined template, here we propose a progressive training method to learn such a template. We also apply the common 2D supervision as aforementioned, where I will skip the cycle and the adversarial objective due to the time limitation. So how to make use of the core part segmentation map? Remember that we have the texture floor, which can also sample the part probability map from the 2D domain to the UV space. According to the semantic invariance, parts should be consistent on the UV space. Therefore, we simply average all the individual sampled scopes map to formulate this canonical semantic UV map. We found that this canonical map has much better quality than the individual ones, as it rules out the outliers and noises. Then, by warping the canonical semantic UV map to each estimated shape and comparing its rendered probability map with the original semantic part segmentation map, we can correct both the camera and shape prediction. The effectiveness of the semantic consistency can be further explained in this example. Once we have a flying bird, it's very likely that the network output a shape and a texture that highly consistent with our silhouette and the RGB values in the 2D. However, the semantic maps are totally wrong, as the head is warped to the tip of the wings, where we call it camera shape confusion. If we warp the canonical map to the reconstructed shape and enforce the semantic consistency, and then such confusion can be easily avoided. Okay, so far we explained how to reduce the ambiguity in the self-supervised single-view reconstruction without the need of manual key annotations. Another prior that used in the previous CMR framework is the template. Well, to have a self-supervised method, we would also want to remove this prior. So basically, to learn the template shape, we start from a sphere and update it every k epochs. Each update introduces more details to the template until finally we get a template that looks pretty much like a bird. For each updating stage, we first use the encoder to extract the features of training samples and then feed the average features to the decoder. The output of the decoder is used to update the current template to a new template. Here we put together the semantic consistency module and the template learning module. Both of them are learned in a progressive manner. On the right, we have the template learning procedure as we already introduced before. On the left, we aggregated the canonical semantic UV map also for every case epoch to make sure that the map is already trained for a while and hence be reliable. The whole module is like an aim step in the EM iterative training. In the A step, we simply fix both the current template and the aggregated canonical semantic UV map and then perform common training process for our reconstruction network. So here we show some quantitative result on the bird images. Our model can successfully capture different birds such as duck, fat bird, or even reconstruct from a painting as shown in the last column. We also train our model on rigid objects like cars and motorcycles, as well as non-rigid objects like zebra, horses, and cows. Here I also want to show some quantitative evaluation of the proposed method. We use mask IOU and key point transfer PCK as our matrices. I will skip details of the evaluation process, but the result here shows that our method performs on par, if not better, compared to methods learned from key point supervision and template prior. So here, to summarize, in this work, we learn a single view mesh reconstruction model and a category level template. Specifically, by utilizing cross-instance correspondence, we are able to reduce ambiguity of single-view reconstruction and jointly learn camera and shape reconstruction. In the second part, I will introduce a follow-up work performing dynamic 3D reconstruction. We target on videos of animals captured in the wild. Since large video dataset is not accessible for wild animals, we resort to test time training, where moving shapes are optimized directly at the test time. This is a very challenging task due to the lack of labels, data, very complex appearance, potentially low-quality videos, and large, fast-moving poses of wild animals. So, built on top of still image-based 3D reconstruction, in this work, we propose a semi-supervised model to reconstruct the temporally consistent 3D meshes of deformable object instance from videos in the wild. So here is a brief review. Most existing work for dynamic mesh reconstruction rely on strong shape priors. For example, the articulated model to modeling the motion patterns. We have simple for human body and 3D movable model for the dynamic face. However, our work is much more challenging in the sense that we do not have access to any prior knowledge such as human or face scan, since it is hard or impossible to scan wild animals in the controlled environment. One naive solution is to apply this single-view image reconstruction model, as I have just introduced, to a video frame-wisely. However, as shown in this slide, if we apply the image-based model frame-wisely, the reconstructed object show very discontinuous shape and flickering camera predictions. So there are many reasons. First, most video we found from the internet is captured by cell phones. They may contain low-quality video frames and very small objects. Almost all of them show large domain gaps with the image dataset that we used for training. One solution is to annotate bird videos as much as possible so that we can retrain the model to cover these domain gaps. However, to annotate video frame wisely is never easy. It requires extensive human label, and we cannot guarantee the coherence of the annotations. So, how can we resolve this issue? We resort to online adaptation. First, we train a single-view reconstruction network. During testing, we fine-tune the network to let it adapt to a video. In this work, we use slightly different settings as the previous one. We still adopt the key point annotation due to its superior performance and the relatively low cost of 2D image labeling work. And that's why we call it semi-supervised. Online adaptation is also called test time training. The benefit and the difficulty is that we do not have any labels in the test data. So we need to figure out efficient and effective self-supervised objective that can improve the network over time. I will first introduce the improved single-view reconstruction model when the key point is given. Recall the work I described in the first part of my talk. One limitation of this method is that it assumes the object under consideration is always symmetric. That potentially helps the model to hallucinate the full object given only partial views. However, what if the objects are not symmetric, especially for video or dynamic object? For instance, when a bird rotates its head as shown in the picture on the right. We first improve the shape representation. Instead of using a single template, we decompose it as shape-based combination and vertex offset on top of the shape combination. So to obtain a set of shape bases, we adopt a two-stage training procedure. In the first stage, we still use a single template training, and then in the second stage, based on the first one, we simply inference all the meshes from the training dataset, and then we perform k-means on these reconstructed shapes and obtain a group of cluster center, and we basically set these centers as the basis. So the combination of the bases reveals the identity of an instance. For example, it can be an ordinary bird, a flying bird, or a duck. On top of the base combination, we adopted the deformation term delta V. We know that for this work, we do not restrict the delta V to be symmetric in order to allow flexible shape variations. And similar to the previous work, we train this image reconstruction model with 2D silhouette loss, MAC loss on the RGB pixels, and along with the smooth regularizations. We can also adopt the camera loss since viewpoint can be predicted from the annotated key point. To capture the motion deformation and asymmetry, we further utilize a key point matching loss. As shown here, given an instance, if we know both the 2D key point with their correspondence on the mesh surface, then we can encourage the model to correctly deform the shape by matching the 3D key point projection with 2D key point annotations. In order to get both 2D key point and their correspondence on the mesh surface, for 2D, we directly utilize the ground truth annotations, and for 3D, we first represent 2D key point annotations as heat maps, and then we use the learned texture flow to map them into the UV space. We then average all UV heat map to get a canonical key point UV map. This key point UV map is shared by all instances and indicates the location of each semantic key point on the 3D mesh, which is similar in spirit to the previous work dealing with the scopes map. For instance, the orange circle here represents the key point on the bird's tail. So we can use the canonical key point UV map to find the semantic key point on each reconstruction. If the shape is correctly reconstructed and then we project this key point back to the 2D space, it should overlap with the 2D key point annotations. Otherwise, we will have a loss to encourage the model to learn better shape, so the key point projection could match the ground truth key point annotation. While this key point reprojection pushes the 3D key point to correct locations in the 3D space, one issue is that due to its sparsity, the model easily matches key point by moving only a few vertices instead of correctly deform the body of the object under consideration. So we will get reconstruction with many spikes and unsmooth surface as shown in the box. To resolve it, we utilize ARAP constraint to encourage consistent local shape in the base combination and in the final reconstruction. Here, we show more result of the improved image reconstruction model, where our method is able to capture non-symmetric motion such as head rotation, compared to the baseline method. As mentioned before, once we have the image reconstruction model, if we directly apply it frame-wisely to video, the reconstruction will be incorrect and inconsistent. Also for videos, it is impossible to have 3D annotations of each frame, so we cannot simply do fine-tuning. We propose online adaptation so that even if we only have one video, we can still adapt the image reconstruction model and optimize the result onlinely. We figure out several important invariants with respect to shape, texture, and random parts over time, which reveals the object's internal properties, and agnostic to time, such as shape deformation caused by non-rigid motions. During test time training, we enforce the prediction of these factors to be consistent among different frames of the same video clip. For shape invariance, as discussed above, since the identity and the characteristic of a bird doesn't change over time, we enforce the base combination, which means the beta coefficient in each video frame to be always consistent. So here is a more clear explanation. For example, whether the bird is a dark or a fat one, we always enforce the predictions of base combination, or more specific, the coefficient beta to be the same for different frames in the short video clip. For texture invariance, we enforce the UV texture map to be consistent for each video frame over time. Besides shape and texture, we also explore part invariance in the UV space. Specifically, we paint random strips only on the first frame and propagate them to the rest frame using a self-supervised learned temporal correspondence method. So there are many options for such methods with good performance, and here we choose to use UVC as we listed below. So basically, the important function of the temporal correspondence learning work is that the learned temporal correspondence can be used to propagate strips over time. Here we can simply propagate the random strips from the first frame to the rest of the video. After that, we map the individual part to the UV space, arrange them to have a more reliable part map, and warp it to each predicted shape and render them back to the 2D space. By comparing them against the original propagated strips in the 2D space, the shape and the camera can be regularized over time. Here we show an ablation study where we do not use the proposed shape, texture, and part invariance during the online adaptation. So we can see from the third column, the base combination changes from a dark to a bird over time due to the occluded observations, which demonstrates the contribution of the proposed invariance modules. Here we show another example on the bird category. Despite abrupt change in motion, the model still reconstructed consistent meshes over time. To further evaluate the proposed method quantitatively, we compare mask IOU and key point projection accuracy using the PCK matrix. So again here, we won't go into details about these evaluations. But the results show that our improved image model outperforms the baseline CMR model for all these three metrics, and the online adaptation further improved the model performance as shown in the last column. Furthermore, the comparison of the last two columns demonstrate the effectiveness of the proposed shape, texture, and part invariance discussed earlier. So finally, we show an example on the zebra category where the proposed method can successfully capture the zebra walking motion. We note that different with all previous work conducting zebra reconstruction, our method does not assume any prior of articulation, which is practical for majority animal species that are not well studied. However, our method still catch motion patterns to some extent. So to summarize, in this work, we performed the dynamic mesh reconstruction from a collection of images annotated by key points and a single test video captured in the wild. We first constructed an improved single-view 3D reconstruction model. On top of the model, we explore self-supervised objectives with respect to shape variation, texture, and random parts. In the last part, I will briefly introduce our CVPR work regarding to image superresolution using local implicit image function. Images are typically represented as pixels in computers. While this discrete representation has been successful in many applications, it has a fixed resolution and does not work well if we want to zoom in on this image. Although there are many interpolation algorithms to remedy this issue, the performance is still limited and is far from human intuition. Hence, learning-based method is proposed to perform super-resolution. Typically, a CNN model will be adopted to directly regress the high-resolution pixel values. However, the CNN model is restricted by the predefined upsampling ratio. For example, if we want to upsample an image 4 times, we can either train a 2 times upsampling model and then apply it twice. Or we need to train another neural network by setting the ratio to 4. However, our visual world is continuous. We expect a model that can perform arbitrary, even floating ratio of upsampling. In this work, we achieve this goal via a continuous image representation, which represents an image as a function that maps continuous coordinate to RGB. Our work is inspired by the implicit function largely applied for 3D reconstruction, which produces continuous surface by merely sampling discrete training data. Here we propose leaf. An image in leaf representation is a resolution-free representation that we can zoom in for actual scales. We generate leaf for a given input image and zoom in on it. The zooming process on leaf is natural and consistent with human intuition. Here we show another example. So we introduce how to train an encoder to generate leaf for a given image. A continuous representation needs supervision from a higher resolution than the input image. We thus prepare the data pairs with random and continuous upsampling scales. The high-resolution ground truth is converted to pixel samples at the output end, where x are the coordinate and s are the RGB values. In training, the input image is passed through an encoder that generates a feature map as its leaf representation. The ground truth pixel samples will query on leaf with f theta, and L1 loss is applied to the predictions. In leaf, each image is represented as a 2D feature map. To decode the RGB value at xq, we find its nearest feature vector z star. The first step is feature unfolding. We concatenate the neighboring feature vectors to z star. For clarity, we redefine z star as the resulting feature vector. So the second step is cell decoding. In practice, given the output resolution, xq should be a pixel with specified height and width. We define a learnable decoding function f theta, which is shared by all the images. It takes the feature vector z star, the relative coordinate delta x from z star to xq, and the pixel size c as input, then predict the RGB values as the output. The third step is local in symbol. We generate 4 predictions by the nearest feature vectors in 4 directions and compute their weighted sum with normalized weights. After training with random scales in ×1, 2, ×4, the generated leaf representation can extrapolate to ×20 while maintaining high visual quality. Here we show another example. As another advantage, leaf naturally supports learning with size-varied ground truths. In many applications, to compare ground truth images with a model prediction, we usually have to resize them to the same resolution. This, however, may lose information or introduce artifacts. By defining the output feature map as leaf with a learnable decoding function, without any additional modifications, the whole framework can be trained without resizing the ground truth. So lastly, I will compare the quantitative result by training with resize and training with leaf. With a large upsampling ratio, leaf shows significant improvement on restoring clear boundaries and details. So more results can be found from our paper, which will be presented on Wednesday's morning session. So as a brief summary, in this talk, I slightly extend our discussion to the 3D domain, where our camera facilities is improving for 2D signal capturing. For 3D representation learning and reconstruction, there's still a much longer way to go. Our efforts presented in this talk are to resolve the limitation of imaging by using as least expensive processing as possible, for example, by adopting self-supervised techniques. Specifically, here I presented firstly self-supervised single-view 3D reconstruction, which can reconstruct a non-rigid object merely from a collection of images with favorable results. And then, a more challenging task is performed where we explore self-supervised objectives with the test time training approach for restoring the 3D information of dynamic animals that captured in the wild. Lastly, I also take some time to introduce our novel continuous representation that can restore the degraded images, where arbitrary upsampling scales can be adopted with which fits better to the human perception. So in the rest of the time, I would be very happy to discuss any potential interesting related works, ideas during the Q&A sessions, as well as the conference. So this is the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention.